The world is evolving at a faster pace than ever before, and as we chart unexpected terrain, this podcast explores how design industries can adapt to changing expectations and create a better future for both their businesses and consumers. My name's Carla Buzasi, I'm the CEO of WGSN and your host this week. You're listening to Create Tomorrow, the WGSN podcast. This week, I'm joined by Andrea Bell, our Director of Insight. Over the course of our conversation, we talked about the impact of the pandemic on consumer behaviour, both this year and into the future, what that means for brands and businesses, and how the design industry has to change as a consequence. So without further ado, let's start the conversation. So Andrea, you're the author of our annual Future Consumer Report, and when you were creating the 2022 report, which we published at the beginning of this year, we were obviously living in a very different world. But a lot of the predictions that you made right then actually still have rung true. In fact, they've been accelerated as a consequence of the COVID-19 pandemic. Are there any consumer trends in there that you think are still crucially important for those in design industries right now as they're looking to 2021, 2022, and even the years after that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, and to your point earlier, Carla, it's fascinating because we start the research at the end of the year, and we didn't know some of the, the drivers, fear and safety and security would come through so quickly. I think what's key is over the next 3 years is the still idea of comfort and safety. And what's fascinating is that's not only, when we think of fashion, so we think of our product apparel, is it lightweight, is it flexible, is it providing a sense of coziness, and also transitions into the home too. Think about how much time we're spending in these rooms and amongst these four walls. So we want to make sure that our bedding is comfortable. Bath leisure. Who would have thought, in 2019, we'd all be investing in kind of robes and things that made us feel and look good. And coincidentally, that kind of fear and safety is also driving food and drink too, which is just something that still blows my mind. If you look at the spikes of comfort food sales and snacking sales, I'm not a big sweets person, but I've even found myself going, I'll do a candy bar today. I need a little bit of sugar and joy. So that fear that was really, really strong globally in 2019 has also had a backlash this year. And I don't want to discount anything anyone's going through, but we all want a little bit of joy. So that feeling of optimism and new optimism, we are celebrating the small wins and the craziness of times. And that is really going to be crucial for product design. Think bright colors, funny slogans. We've got a great report on fashion about joyful prints and patterns. And while that necessarily sounds somewhat strange right now, especially in strange times, people still want that day to day. And so I would really urge, fashion designers and product developers, look for how you can insert moments of joy every day into your product, and kind of the rest will follow.
Now, when we published that original Future Consumer Report, there were particular cohorts or tribes, as we tend to call them. Can you talk a little bit about a couple of those and how you've seen those evolve this year?
Yeah, the first one that comes to mind is the compressionalist, and those were at the time based on just the desynchronization of society and kind of the daily pressures we were all facing. So obviously in a desynchronized society, what's happening is that we're all still doing the same things. We're doing it at different times. So we're no longer commuting at the same time, coming home, watching the news at the same time. Now, the pandemic really escalated that. And what we noticed from compressionalists, which are comprised mainly of millennials and Gen X, is that lack of time and that lack of structure created intense pressure. So what does that mean for product development? What does that mean for our daily lives? We're all decision averse. I don't know about you. I get to the end of the day, I don't even want to know what I'm having for dinner. I'm like, can I just eat? The idea of going to a website and being flooded by product when I'm just trying to order a face mask for a friend. So those are things that still, even in 21 and 22, again, with the ups and downs of different economies winning and losing and the pandemic, we still need to think how to make that ease of path to purchase will be critical. And for product websites, we talked about e-com and making sure you're looking at your SKU counts. But for fashion, what's really fascinating is I can't stress having your product information be solid? What is the sizing? We can't try things on. What does the size look like? What is the fabric? So when you think of your product assortment online, really look at ways you can showcase that product, large images without it being overwhelming, and what can you tell the consumer in 2 seconds about that product and why they should purchase it?
Yeah, I personally really identify with this particular compression list. And I think one of the myths of the pandemic has been that everyone had more time. You know, the number of articles I've read about that, and people are filling it with home baking and things like that. I feel I've got less time than ever, and I'm definitely not the only one in that situation. People's jobs have got harder. People are working more for less money, and they're juggling things that perhaps they didn't have to in the past. And I think it's really key there, what you're saying, which is for that kind of person, you need to make life a bit easier. So you need to bring those moments of joy, but those moments of joy need to be easy to obtain. And although that compression list was very much when we were, researching it, we were looking to those millennials and Gen X. But actually, I think it's kind of sort of blurred into some of those other age brackets, largely because everyone's thrown together. And you've got generations who perhaps hadn't shopped online in the way that my generation had in the past, but have been forced to. They have had to learn very quickly about e-com. They've had to grow comfortable with online shopping. And for them, even more so, that needs to be easy. If it's complicated, if it's difficult, they're not going to come back to your brand. And what has been interesting, especially I think in the food category, we have seen businesses getting much simpler because they've been forced to by the consumer. But some of those other industries are still lagging behind. That expectation that if you want my product, you're going to have to work for it, I think just needs to be discounted. And even if we get back to the next normal, the new normal, whatever you want to call it in future years, our expectations that shopping should be easy online are not going to go away.
I agree 100%. And what's funny is you're kind of giving we're now going to do a little sneak peek of Future Consumer 2023, because to your point earlier, I feel like we're working more than ever. There's actually a behavioral thing happening right now called pandemic productivity. And it actually shows that in regions, including the UK and the US, our productivity in terms of our work has increased 43% year over year. And for executives in C-suite, that can be up to 64%. And so when we think about, again, kind of 2022, 2023, going back to your point, is these different generations having these different needs for product, for, ways to shop, it becomes even greater because, again, that time we're not necessarily getting back, but we're looking at it in different ways. And it's fascinating, some of the regions that are coming up with really interesting solutions. South Korea has done some fascinating stuff with different shopping hours and e-com. Again, putting messaging on e-com for that person that's coming in maybe between the hours of 7 and 9. There's kind of vampire hours that we talked about for new moms. So when we look towards that future of product alignment, we always say at WGSN, right product, right time, but it truly matters. You have to work twice as hard because everyone is competing now for screen time, just like this, and more importantly, for phone time.
So let's switch. Give me an insight into one of the other cohorts and how you think they've evolved during 2020.
It's the new optimist. And when we set out with that cohort, what we really wanted to say was it was a very multi-generational persona. You had kind of Gen Z really relating and wanting to work more, learn more, have mentorship from different generations, Gen X and Boomers. And then on the flip side, you had older generations that were saying, I want to knowledge share with someone younger than me. And whether it's learning how to do TikTok, which just is crazy, and the streams of that are massive. And actually, one of the fastest growing groups of TikTok are 45 plus. So with that multi-generational approach, we see that still going strong. And one of the things I loved about the new optimist, was really wanting visual identity to be diverse and inclusive. Young people have been victim of so much online bullying and constantly being scrutinized that they said, we want diversity and inclusion for all. And it wasn't tied to a region. I mean, from Brazil to Southeast Asia to Eastern Europe, everyone really wanted to know that their visual identity, no matter if you were 17 or 70, was being showcased properly online and included. And we're seeing that play out more than ever in 2020. The daily news feeds, we know inclusivity and diversity will continue to be a key sticking point, and a key way to truly, engage with people that you want to have a relationship with in terms of your brand identity.
I think that you're touching on something really important here, which is that 2020 has not just been a year of a global pandemic. It's been a year of protests. It's been a year of people demanding action. I was going to say how important. I think that's the wrong question. We know this is crucially important. Do you see this continuing? Do you see this as a tipping point in the makeup of our world and how people are treated? Personally, I hope that's the case, but how do you think that's actually going to bear out in reality?
Well, when we look at this notion of radical reform across the globe, and we just had our Trends Days at WGSN, which was when all our global teams come together and share our insights and present what we're finding from our regions to kind of get that regional input. Every single region really focused on what does diversity mean for business. And we're starting to see a few things happen that will continue to happen. So one is the 15% pledge, which is North America based right now because they've had such success. The founders have said, we're trying to get to Europe because of resources. We're just going to focus on Canada and North America. And what that essentially is retailers saying, I will pledge 15% of my shelf space to diverse brands and to BIPOC brands. At Target's on it. There's so many people that have really pushed the needle. And what we know is going to happen is that is no longer going to be an option, just like having a sustainability program is key, and having those CSR reports that show how you're making sustainability a priority. We see that with diversity as well. And there's a lot of what we're calling it at WGSN is actioning accountability. And there's a lot of brands that are jumping into that space to really say, this is what we're doing, and this is how you can essentially keep checking our growth, our movement, and what we plan to do, putting basically your money where your mouth is through 2023.
Let's talk a little bit about sustainability, because this is topic's not quite the right word. This huge movement, this responsibility towards the environment. It was front page news before the pandemic. Greta Thunberg across all our newspapers, all our websites, some governments finally committing to action. And then the pandemic has come in, and that has moved to the top of people's priority lists, and moved to the top of businesses' priority lists as they're just fighting for survival. Are you concerned that sustainability is off the agenda, and how do we get it back on and make sure that with everything else going on, businesses are not ignoring their responsibility towards the environment?
And that is a really tough question, because when we first started to track what was happening with sustainability, impacting businesses, think about it right now. Because of the pandemic, we aren't as sustainable as we were last year for certain regions. If you look at the US and parts of Western Europe, one of the things that has spiked is the rise of single-use plastics. People are fearful to touch other people's bags or cutlery now at a restaurant. Masks, if they're not cloth, you're throwing them away. People are wearing gloves, hand sanitizers. So I think while we're still in the fear phase of which we're actually getting out of the fear phase of touch and what does that mean, we globally need to go, okay, we've gone from urgency to true emergency. And we really need to look at, if in this brave new world, what are small changes that we can make? Sustainable packaging continues to be a key driver for most of our clients, whether it's packaging of shoes, whether it's hangers. Another big one that's going to continue to be top of mind for consumers, and I'm guilty of it of myself, is e-com. So when you think about, we order something, I ordered, a lipstick for a friend, and it came in a box this big. And I thought, this is just so wasteful. So we're seeing a lot of brands try to figure out, A, how do you not have the waste, but B, when you were done with the actual cardboard and plastic, how do you send it back? How do you reuse it? There's some fascinating ones. There's a great YouTube tutorial for those of you who have kids that actually shows a mom building different play sets for her children during the pandemic made out of recycled cardboard from her orders. So it's the little things that matter. but it hasn't necessarily gone away, the topic of sustainability, but what we've seen is driving the innovations into new verticals. So again, packaging key, and fabric materials. Oh my gosh. I feel like that's, we could do a whole separate, podcast just on, the fabric and material innovation.
I just want to talk about the younger generation. Again, if you look at the headlines, this poor generation who've missed out on schooling, who have been locked up in their homes at a very young age and having to cope with that. What kind of long-term impact do you think it's going to have on consumer behaviour for that young generation who, for some of them, this is going to have been, a quarter of their lives or a sixth of their lives or something like that, growing up during a pandemic?
There's two big things we're currently tracking at WGSN. One is what we've dubbed the isolation generation. And while that sounds so sad even to say it, to think about, children across the globe feeling very isolated, it's true. They're not getting those daily touch points with friends, or some of them aren't getting to play outside. So what that is creating, or what the output of them being so isolated, is two things that we actually are very hopeful and optimistic about. One, they're getting more family time. If they're hopefully in a positive environment, they're getting more time with the family. So they're appreciating, again, multi-generational conversations. And what we've seen is, parents that typically worked a lot or weren't able to spend time with them, that family connected time is really resulting in shared ideas, shared values, and kind of a resurgence of playtime. As cheesy as that sounds, we're seeing more parents actively involved, saying, okay, yes, let's go play soccer indoors. Let's learn together. So with that, the learning is key for us, because when we think of this generation and what they're going to go through, is they're learning on screen. So tactility and tangible learning is going to be so important. And from kind of a product development point of view, toys, STEAM, STEM, all of these things are ripe for that, right? I can code something on my computer and make the robot move in real life. I can build Legos and build blocks. And we're seeing, what's fascinating about this is so many brands are playing in that space. Lego's always been fantastic, but for those of you who are at home right now with small children, Lego introduced in March a great website where you can go on and it has a list of downloadable materials that you can truly build and play with your kids in real time. So we think there'll be a lot of playfulness with this generation. We think this will kind of be, as alphas transition into teenagers, we think they will live loud and proud, in the sense of they spent a majority of time locked up. So they're going to want to see the world, and they're basically going to want to help create it.
I love talking to you because you're always so optimistic about the future, which I think is a really important thing now. Let's just very briefly, there's businesses who are fighting survival, who have, their raison d'etre is creating product, and people are buying less product than they are. They have, soaring financial anxiety levels. They don't need some of the products that they did in a previous lifetime because they're not socializing the same way. There aren't events in the same time way. What's your advice to businesses who really feel they're just like kind of holding on with their fingernails?
For anyone that's just really focused on the next 18 months, like you said, it's a daily struggle. Monthly, it's a daily struggle. Quarterly, how do we keep our current business, but how do we grow our business as well? I would say really hone in on two things. Look at your product assortment in terms of your dead stock and what you're making. That's going to be critical. We know that the pandemic has driven less buying and a kind of a downtick in certain categories, but a surge in other categories. But the one thing we can say is don't try to play in every single category. Really look at your assortment. What can you sell? What are your key hero items? People were buying less before the pandemic. We saw a downturn in apparel just because people essentially said, we still need it. I want it for my identity and I need it for key events in my life, but I'm not purchasing as much. So SKU counts are essential. And this also goes for food and drink too. We often think about SKU count just in terms of, fashion, but, again, think about your interiors, your food and drink. What hasn't sold on your shelf in 12 months that no one's eating? Do you need to keep making it? Is that going to be a long-term investment? Probably not. So really focusing on your zombie SKUs and what you can edit out. And the second one, without a doubt, is once you land on those hero items, once those core items are top of mind, you have to focus on engagement in e-commerce. A lot of the projects that we're working on with Mindset right now, which is our consultancy side of WGSN, is truly that. What's our brand messaging on e-com? How does it look on a screen, on a smartphone, on a laptop? What products are we putting front and center? And again, what are we describing them as? I don't want to go on a website and just see a shirt that says black dress size large. What's the material? What's the fabric? How does it move? What's the length? So those two things over the next 18 months should put you top of mind, because again, you can see where you're losing money, what's not selling, and B, it's a real-time way to test where you are winning, and where you can continue to invest. 2020 is a year of test and invest, and I don't see it transitioning much more than 2021. And not to be too optimistic, but that's always me. I would say now's the time to reset. We have the opportunity. So let's figure out how we can, we always say the term build back better, but truly, how can you build back better for 2021?
No, I think that's a lovely, lovely place to end. Thank you so much for your insight. As I said, it's always a joy talking to you. I will leave feeling optimistic, and I hope all our listeners and viewers will too. Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thanks, Carla. Sending you sunshine.
Thank you so much to Andrea Bell for taking the time to join me today. It is always such a learning experience to chat with her. I walk away more intelligent and more informed every single time. And thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed what you've heard, then please subscribe to the show, which is available on all major podcast platforms. And if you really liked what you heard, then please leave us a rating and review on iTunes. It really helps us get the word out there. If you're interested in any of the things we've been talking about today, then please head over to WGSN.com, where you can find out how to get access to all of our insights and analysis. We are constantly publishing new reports around how we can design a better, brighter future for our industry. So thank you again to my guest. I'd also like to thank our podcast producer, Roland Bodenham, and thank you for listening. Peter Marion will be back in 2 weeks' time for the next episode. So until then, stay well and healthy, and look forward to seeing you next time.